Science!
Welcome to Science this week, everybody. This week, we're going to celebrate an incredible anniversary that just actually passed. On May 18th, 1969, Apollo 10 was rocketed to the moon, and it was the final mission to actually test all of the lunar lander and the final crewed mission before that historic Apollo 11 later that year. And so we just celebrated the 50th anniversary. And it's also the 50th anniversary of NASA and Peanuts collaborating together. Now, Peanuts, the comic strip created by Charles Schulz, has a incredible history with NASA. And I thought it was really interesting that they're not only celebrating their anniversary, but doing a lot of new stuff to promote space exploration and also the collaboration between NASA and the Peanuts gang. In 2018, NASA and Peanuts have collaborated over the past year into this year, actually, leading up to this anniversary with various STEM activities and actual STEM curriculum for children K through 5, a mini documentary, and other new products that share the excitement of science, technology, engineering, and math for the next generation of explorers. Peanuts also teamed up with Apple Television to present a 10-minute feature that includes archival interviews of 2 of the 3 Apollo 10 astronauts, Tom Stafford and Eugene Cernan, as well as an interview with the current NASA flight director, Ginger Carrick. And I just watched this featurette. It's incredible. It's if you have Apple Television, just search for Peanuts and NASA, and it'll come right up. This featurette presents a lighthearted look at Apollo 10 from the imagination of documentarian Morgan Neville, and it stars actually Jeff Goldblum and Ron Howard playing themselves, trying to uncover the mystery of if Snoopy was actually the 4th member of the Apollo 10 crew. And it's very fun. NASA has shared a very proud association with Charles M. Schulz and his American icon, Snoopy the dog, since Apollo missions actually began in the 1960s. Schulz created comic strips depicting Snoopy on the moon, capturing public excitement about America's achievements and furthering our excitement about the space race. In May of 1969, Apollo 10 astronauts traveled to the moon for a final checkout on those lunar landings and everything that we would learn concerning the later Apollo missions. Because the mission required the lunar module to skim the moon's surface to within about 50,000 feet and, quote-unquote, snoop around, scouting the Apollo 11 actual landing site that would become the landing site, the crew named the lunar module Snoopy. And then, so the command module was obviously named Charlie Brown, Snoopy's loyal owner. This was actually a joke between the crew members, and it just stuck. Jean Schulz, the widow of Peanuts creator Charles Schulz, said that the initiative continues today, and it accentuates the cartoonist's enthusiasm for NASA, noting that it was all very personal for him. NASA first approached Schulz in the mid-1960s about putting Snoopy on its spaceflight safety materials. They even crafted a fun narrative because if you're a fan of the Peanuts early comic strips, Snoopy also would pretend to be the World War I flying ace. So, and he would be going after taking down the Red Baron. And so they took that and was like, because of his service in World War I as a flying ace, we want him to help us roll out these new safety initiatives in NASA. So this year marks the 50th anniversary of the creation of another thing called the Silver Snoopy Award. It's an honor that recognizes achievements by NASA employees and contractors. And in 1969, the Apollo 10 lunar mission named modules for these characters and also started giving out these awards. These awards are only given out by astronauts to employees and contractors. So it's a very prestigious award. It's a little silver Snoopy pin. Craig Schulz, the cartoonist's youngest son, and the Peanuts movie producer actually noted that his father called the Apollo 10 naming the proudest moment in his career. And his widow added, if he saw that these men were willing to risk their lives for a mission such as this, he certainly could bless the use of his characters. And then this new era, it's cut to 2018. This new collaboration aims to create entertainment and all sorts of new content, including publishing, merchandising, and interactive projects that help popularize science, tech education, and space exploration. Robert Perlman, the editor of Collect Space and the past online program director for the National Space Society, said, with its new mission for Peanuts, NASA now has the chance to branch off, or rather stem off, its 50 years of success using Snoopy as a symbol for human spaceflight safety, while at the same time being able to engage a new generation with a set of highly relatable and widely recognizable characters. For the new campaign, astronaut Snoopy will be the face of the STEM-based school curriculums with a focus on America's latest explorations into deep space. And there's this incredible video I'm going to show you now that is a look back on that mission, that Apollo 10 mission from May of 1969.
Simply stated, the purpose of the Apollo 10 flight is a final test of the men and machines required to do the lunar landing mission.
Roger, Houston, Apollo 10, you can tell the world that we have arrived.
And they give a silver Snoopy for Excellence Awards. I wanted to honor the people that had worked so hard, so we called it Snoopy. But you needed two names, so naturally the other one was Charlie Brown. You're amazed at what you see. The one thing that always amazed me were the size of the boulders. There were these gigantic craters, and down on the bottom would be boulders, and up on the rim would be boulders. We're using the Hasselblad cameras to give the highest resolution available then, and the radar was going. So radar mapped, photo mapped, and visually mapped. We're coming down, going upside down and backwards to retrograde. I heard the thruster start to fire. They're just bang, bang, bang. So what I did, the staging switch is here, raise the thing, boom, stage it. In the meanwhile, I went to hard stops. But I got it back under control, and we made the maneuver. Came back and did a perfect rendezvous. One thing people always ask, were you frightened? Were you scared? The answer is no. They were fighter pilots, test pilots, so we knew what risks were. You did everything you could to mitigate the risk, but there was a risk. And so we understood that. Well, we had a series of debriefings with them because we had all the procedures worked out. In fact, I remember I went to Neil, I says, buddy, here you are. Here's all the techniques, all the procedures down to the last 50,000 feet. And you take it there, hard descent on the surface, 50,000 feet up, it's all done. So they just followed all the procedures we had. We made it back from the moon to the Earth in 42 hours. It was 24,791 miles an hour, or in Mach numbers, Mach 36. Or if you want to be precise scientifically, it was 0.0037% of the speed of light. So we were flat moving.
like I said, Apollo 11 put the first men on the moon. But Apollo 10 was the dress rehearsal, the rehearsal dinner before this historic mission was going to take place. We needed to test out those lunar landers and all of the processes, basically painting a line in the sand from Apollo 10 so Apollo 11 could follow it and make it happen without any hiccups. And President JFK actually said at the beginning of that decade, we would go to the moon by the end of the decade. We would put men on the moon by the end of 1969, and we ended up achieving that goal. And it wasn't in small part because of all the Apollo missions that preceded it. So Apollo 10 needed to iron out all the kinks before the actual landing. This included a detailed scouting of the landing site, which would be the site where Apollo 11's lunar lander would hit. And so Apollo 10 had to test Snoopy, the lander, its descent and ascent capabilities, and its rendezvous and docking capabilities in actual lunar orbit. This wasn't an easy task because, remember, at this time, we didn't know as much about the moon as we do now, and we definitely didn't know as much about the moon until we started actually landing on it. So it was all new data that we were getting from these Apollo missions, especially Apollo 10. Actually, Apollo 10 and Apollo 11 were the only Apollo missions whose crew were all veterans of spaceflight. Thomas Stafford had flown on Gemini 6 and Gemini 9. John Young had flown on Gemini 3 and Gemini 10. And Eugene Cernan had flown with Stafford on Gemini 9. So this dress rehearsal for the moon landing brought the Apollo lunar module, that Snoopy module, about 8.4 nautical miles from the lunar surface. That's about 15.5 kilometers. Now, this is at the point where powered descent would begin on actual landing. Practicing this approach orbit would refine knowledge of the lunar gravitational field and give us more data on the actual gravity that we'd be dealing with landing on the moon. And that would help us to calibrate the powered descent guidance system to within 1 nautical mile, which is about 2 kilometers, needed for a landing. So we're really refining all of these calculations. So when we actually land on the moon, we're not kind of going in blind. Craig Nelson, who wrote the book Rocket Men, wrote that NASA took special precaution to ensure Stafford and Cernan would not attempt to make that first landing. Nelson quoted Cernan as saying, "A lot of people thought about the kind of people we were," Cernan talking about him and Stafford. "Don't give those guys an opportunity to land because they might." So the ascent module, the part we lifted off the lunar surface with, was short-fueled. The fuel tanks weren't full at all. So we literally if we tried to land on the moon, we couldn't have gotten off. So they stacked the deck against these guys just in case that they were like, we're going to be the first people to land on the moon. I think that's hilarious. The Apollo 10 crew are also credited as humans who have traveled the farthest away from home, some 408,950 kilometers. That is from the farthest point they made it to their families in Houston. And I'll explain this, while most Apollo missions orbited the moon at the same 111 kilometers from the lunar surface, the distance between the Earth and the moon varies. About 43,000 kilometers between the perigee and apogee, when the moon is the closest to the Earth and the farthest away from the Earth throughout the year. And the Earth's rotation makes the distance from Houston vary by another 12,000 kilometers each day. So the Apollo 10 crew reached the farthest point in their orbit around the far side of the moon at about the same time the Earth's rotation put Houston nearly a full Earth diameter away. So to this day, this manned crew mission is still, these 3 men have been the farthest away from Earth at any given time. Now, we're going to break those records because we're going to Mars. We are definitely going to do that at some point. But it's pretty interesting that this mission, that record has never been broken. Apollo 10 was also the first mission to carry a color television camera inside the spacecraft and made the first ever live color TV transmissions from space. And I actually have the transmission that they sent back of the Earth rising from the moon as they were orbiting the moon in the command module, and I'll play that for you as we continue here. During the descent stage separation, the lunar module began to roll unexpectedly because the crew accidentally duplicated commands into the flight computer, which took the lunar module out of abort mode. And that wasn't the correct way to really do this maneuver. Because they were transmitting live TV, the live network broadcast actually caught Cernan and Stafford uttering several expletives before regaining control of the lunar module. And while the incident was actually downplayed by NASA, the roll was just several revolutions from being unrecoverable, which would have resulted in the lunar module crashing into the lunar surface. After Stafford and Cernan docked with Charlie Brown and re-entered it, Snoopy's ascent stage was sent on a trajectory past the moon into a heliocentric orbit by firing its engine to fuel depletion. Now, this is unlike the Apollo 11 ascent stage, which was left in lunar orbit to eventually crash into the moon. All ascent stages after Apollo 11 were instead intentionally steered into the moon to obtain readings from seismometers and placed on the surface, and also readings on the lunar modules themselves to basically squeeze as much science as we possibly could out of these missions. Obviously, except for the one on Apollo 13, which did not land but was used as the lifeboat to save the crew as they slingshotted around the moon and came home. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, watch the very famous movie, Apollo 13, that Ron Howard and Tom Hanks made. Snoopy's ascent stage orbit was not tracked after 1969, and its current location is still unknown to this day. In 2011, a group of amateur astronomers in the UK started a project to search for it. It is the only once crewed spacecraft still in outer space without a crew. So it's somewhere in the vastness of space, and we just don't know exactly where it is. And speaking on that Earthrise video that we were watching, it's humbling to think about just how heroic these early astronauts were, how they got to experience something only a few human beings in the history of humanity have ever gotten to experience, and how their sacrifice, seriously, of putting themselves through the trials to actually make it to on these missions, to make it so we could actually put people on the moon and getting back there today. It's incredible to think of this achievement and how it literally laid that groundwork for Apollo 11, the subsequent Apollo missions, and then obviously what we're thinking about now. We hope to do this again. Apollo 17 in 1972 was the final mission to the moon. And in fact, Eugene Cernan from Apollo 10 was one of those men on the moon in Apollo 17. And so in 2024, as we've talked about right on this very segment, NASA has huge plans to send both men and women back to the moon to set up a gateway orbiting lunar scientific space station around the moon, and to really dig our feet in on the lunar surface to figure out how we can work and survive in such a harsh atmosphere and get us ready to eventually make it to Mars.